Chapter 12. The late fall fog slowly wrapped itself around the buildings of the Volker Institute, plunging all into a gray-white haze. Security was doubled at all the gates, passes were closely checked, flashlights illuminated the interiors of the few cars that drove up, patrols were increased to 1 every 20 minutes. Guards sat at television monitors trying to pierce the white sheet that had descended. Others, dressed as orderlies, patrolled the interior of the main building and the few open outbuildings. It had been 10 hours since Beck's body had been discovered. 10 hours of hurried meetings, frantic phone calls, and frenzied expressions. The initial shock, followed by agitated dismay, had now given way to nervous looks and people traveling in groups across the grounds instead of on their own. The final meeting had just broken up with no real agreement on any issue save one. Brian Newman was indeed still in the area. Conrad Edel paced on the roof of the Institute, damming the fog, constantly redeploying his men, and desperately trying to figure out what had happened. He'd been present at Beck's autopsy, had felt a need, almost irresponsible, to be. The findings were not surprising. Beck had died of a broken neck, most probably obtained by being hung with a doubled narrow cord. His body also showed signs of light trauma to the legs, arms, and upper torso. The pathologist was unable to say with any degree of certainty whether the bruising was due to an accident or deliberate action, but Edel knew. Nor could the doctor say whether Beck had been hung by another or had committed suicide. But Edel knew. He knew, and he cursed himself for allowing it to get that far. Newman had betrayed him, he thought, on that cold, damp, isolated rooftop. Betrayed him, his trust, made a mockery of his faith and beliefs, using them to create the environment he needed for his escape. And Beck was dead because of it. Now, after a brief trip to his church to see that a prayer vigil would be started for the soul of Alex Beck, he stood on the roof and waited. The search team's intelligence analysts were convinced that Newman would move on now that Beck was dead. Patricia believed that Newman must have discovered the dead Beck, then laid him out so that he would retain his dignity, the final act of a close friend. Cap had remained mysteriously non-committal, but none of it mattered, not really. Edel knew that Newman would come. He didn't know why, didn't know when or how, but that he would come, Edel was certain, and he would be ready when they met again. 37 to 01. Edel pulled the radio from its holster on the opposite hip from the gun. This is 01. This is 37. We are completely fog-blind here. Visibility is 0. Over. This is 01. It is the same everywhere and still coming in from the north. Over. This is 37. I request permission to pull back to CP. Over. This is 01. Negative. Edel paused, looking out at the fog-shrouded countryside surrounding the Institute. All grounds units. This is 01. Maintain positions. Repeat. Maintain positions. Switch to LP status. I repeat, become listening posts. The 4 men that made up Security Unit 37 stood around their improvised post along the east fence and shook their heads as they heard their chief's instructions. The old man's losing it, one said glumly. We're going to freeze our nuts off, another said as he began to stow the night vision equipment from the damp. The oldest of the 4 just kept staring out into the quiet, into the fog. Quiet, we're a listening post now. The 4th man smiled as he pulled out a thermos of coffee. It's going to be a long night. He began pouring steaming cups for each of the men. When he turned to the oldest one, he stopped, puzzled by the man's posture. The man had taken a few steps out of the post, was standing stock still, his head cocked to the side, eyes closed. "Albert," the man with the coffee said softly. "Shh," was the older man's brief reply. The other men noticed and put down their cups. Weapons were drawn and cocked. They silently moved into support positions around the older man. "What is it, Albert?" the man with the coffee said as he put aside the thermos, picking up a compact MP5K assault rifle. Albert shook his head. I don't know." He was quiet for long seconds. Suddenly he cocked his head to one side, maybe 50 meters at 12 o'clock. He stared into the moving cloud that had dropped around them. Then, slowly, he shook his head. "Maybe I was wrong." He started to turn back to the post, then stopped, turning again to the men. "But stay alert anyway." In Clemente's upper floor room, the tension was just as thick. Patricia and Cap sat alongside the bed, sipping coffee. Clemente sat up in the bed, IVs running into both arms, an oxygen mask slurring his words. Jenny sat off to the side, not a part of the sober conversation, but unwilling to leave the room at this stage of her husband's illness. Clemente's skin was a pale yellow-white, his eyes crusted, his hands trembling whenever he found the strength to move them. He breathed in wheezy hisses, barely participating in the conversation, but clearly following it. Patricia shook her head slowly. "I disagree," she said in an exhausted voice. "There's no evidence to suggest that." "There is the note," Cap said as he took a drink of coffee. "The note. Well, at least there we agree. It is the key to all this." She pulled her copy of the note out of her nearby briefcase. "You've read it. I think it speaks for itself." "I agree," Cap said calmly. "But you're still not willing to concede that Newman isn't responsible for Beck's death." Cap looked at Clemente, who shrugged while smiling weakly. "He accepts responsibility for the action," Cap said simply. He paused. "Why would you dispute him?" "Read the man's words." Patricia's voice was becoming harsh. She began to read aloud from the photocopy. I quote, "I assume, of course, that I will be held responsible," unquote. She looked up at the two men. What could be clearer? Blank looks from both of them. She shook her head and began again. "Here he is, alone, one of a kind, hunted merely because he is one of a kind. He comes across Beck shortly after the man kills himself. He knows that we're going to blame him. Why not? The Russians blamed him for everything bad that happened around him. In his mind, we're no different." Clemente lifted his oxygen mask. "There's nothing to support that," he wheezed. "There's everything to support it," Patricia shot back, ignoring the condition of the man in the bed. "Read the letter." She held it up in front of them. "Newman refers to his detention, to our flaccid explanation for how we were treating him." She looked right at Cap. "Words, Doctor, very close to the ones you used several months ago referring to the Russians." "So," Cap countered, "why not leave the scene intact? Certainly it would be easier for us to determine the true cause of the general's death if he were discovered still hanging from the rope. Mr. Newman is more than bright enough to understand that, no." "And why," Clemente said softly, "take the risk of transporting the general's body to his home and laying him out so carefully?" Patricia shrugged. He must have felt at least some form of guilt over the man's death. Maybe it had to do with the years they'd spent together before his imprisonment. A mutual respect, if you will, that caused him to want to see the general's memory preserved, in as noble a fashion as possible. I thought your Homo crudelis was without emotions, Kat said, smiling. How do you reconcile such intense grief reaction? She put down the letter and poured herself some coffee. When we get him back, give me a few sessions. I'll find out. Cap shook his head as he turned to Clemente, the optimism of youth. Clemente nodded. Patricia looked confused. What do you mean? She paused, looking from one to the other. The search teams have orders to use non-lethal force when they find him, she said slowly. Don't they? Clemente's eyes took on a deeply sorrowful look. Clinical Patty, he murmured. You never did quite get it. Get what? Her voice was low and cautious. That the patient does not exist in a vacuum for your personal contemplation. Cap looked at Clemente, then turned back to Patricia. A line general of the American military is dead under, at the very least, questionable circumstances. An American agent with known, demonstrated violent tendencies, formerly under the command of this general, is missing and acknowledges at least a tacit involvement in the general's death. He looked deeply into the young woman's eyes. What do you think the response of the Americans will be? My gosh, Cap nodded. If Captain Kilgore has not received orders to shoot on sight by now, then it is only because of the inevitable delays of any large command structure. We have perhaps 12 hours, probably less, before such orders are received. They can't, Patricia said weakly. Don't they realize what he is, what further study of him could mean? They realize it, Cap said quietly, and that realization will be part of their reasoning. For 5 long minutes, no one said a word. Eventually, Patricia looked up. You said that once before, she said as she looked questioningly at Cap. At the hearing, you said, what was it? She thought back to the events of 1 month before. You said that they always knew what he was, or something like that. I did, Cap nodded. What did you mean? Cap began to put his papers away in his briefcase. Is there any purpose served from restirring the stew? What did you mean? Her voice was becoming insistent. Clemente pulled the mask off. Tell her, Otto. He looked over at Patricia. She'll just pester it out of you anyway. He smiled at her as he put his mask back on. Something about that weak, amused smile cut through all the garbage, straight to Patricia's soul. Maybe we ought to continue this elsewhere, she whispered to Cap. Clemente held up a hand. I am not dead yet, Dr. Nelwyn. He wheezed through the mask. And I am still your department head and project supervisor. She smiled at him. And still a pain in the ass, she said, with a tear in her eye. Clemente raised his eyebrows as he pulled the mask off again. Thank you for noticing. Dr. Cap, please continue. Cap sighed. Very well. He stood and walked to the window, looking down on the blanket of fog that covered the grounds. He continued to stare out as he talked. The concept of using society's outcasts for dangerous, deniable missions is nothing new to the world. In the last century, prison labor was often used to build railroads through hostile lands in Asia. In this century, violent murderers have been offered clemency in exchange for political contract killings. It has been an accepted practice. Granted. Patricia had never seen Caps like this, so inward. As those missions grew more dangerous and simultaneously more complex, Cap continued, it is a logical extension of the thought that mere convict recruits could never accomplish the needed goals. Which is why they suggested sociopaths, Patricia chimed in. Sociopaths, yes. Cap turned back to face her. Clemente pulled down his oxygen mask, letting it rest on the uneven rise and fall of his chest. It would never work, he said firmly. Sociopaths are too me-oriented. They could never be trusted not to sell out their secrets to the other side if they were offered a better deal, or just out of spite. He took a hit of the oxygen as Cap continued the thought. They are too unstable, too unpredictable, with a loyalty only to themselves. They could never be truly relied on. Patricia shook her head. What are you saying, exactly? Clemente reached out and took the young woman's hand. As much of a shock as this is going to be to you, you are not the only one who has theorized about the next generational evolution of man. Cap smiled. I wrote my first paper on the subject before you were born. It was based on 20 or so works written before that. Clemente nodded, and Nietzsche beat us all by over 100 years. Consider the theorists at the Horizon Institute, sitting in their ivory tower, reading down the list of requirements submitted to them. Cap turned back to the window. The specifications demanded could never possibly be met by any existing personality type, but Clemente took some oxygen and finished the thought. Theoretically, a person with the lack of emotional restraints of a sociopath, with a capability for violence, like a phased atavist, with a high IQ, that person could fit the bill. To the Horizon Institute, Cap said, it would all have been an interesting mental exercise. An abstract man, if you will. Either a new man or a mutated current man. Either way, it didn't matter. There was only a 1/20th of 1% chance that the man actually existed. His face took on a dismayed look. But to a government with 265 million souls to choose from, it was merely a challenge. Cap took a calculator from his pocket and tossed it to the tray in front of Patricia. Do the mathematics if you like. In a population of 265 million people, there would be a pool of well over 130,000 possible candidates. He laughed bitterly. In the standing military alone, over 13,000 possible Newmans. Clemente closed his eyes. They know what Brian Newman is, he said quietly. They know because they set out to find him, and because they know what he is, because he's no longer under their control, is developing a... Jenny came over and gently put the mask back on her husband. After checking his pulse and seeing that his breathing had settled into a normal sleep pattern, she returned to her chair and continued her reading. Cap kissed her on the cheek, waited for Patricia to hug her, then escorted his young colleague out into the hall. What was Jack trying to say? Patricia asked Cap. Cap pushed the button for the elevator. He took a deep breath. Because they know what Mr. Newman is or may be, because he is no longer under their control, and because he is developing self-awareness of what he may be. The doors opened. He gestured for Patricia to precede him, but she indicated she was going back to Clemente's rooms. Cap smiled sadly and stepped in. Because of that, they must destroy him. The doors started to close, but Patricia suddenly held out her hand. We've got to stop them from killing him. She looked around, then leaned forward. You think he's some kind of mutated intelligence. I think he's the next evolutionary step. Fine. Either way, we need to study him to find out. Don't you agree? My dear Dr. Nelwyn, it is a large world. Over 4.5 billion people. Do the math. There are a possible 1.25 million Brian Newmans out there. He gently reached out and removed her hand from the door. And I suspect it will not be long before we begin to hear from each of them. He rode down to his office floor, deeply concerned about Jack Clemente's health, about Patricia Nowen's naivety, about his own steadily more jaundiced view of life. He ignored greetings from the few nurses and orderlies he encountered, shook his head at the security men so ineptly trying to appear as orderlies, and slowly made his way to his office. After unlocking the door, he flipped on the light and stepped in. "Close the door, please, doctor." Cap froze at the sound of Newman's voice coming from somewhere to his left. "The door," Newman urged in a flat, toneless voice. "Cap, close the door. Lock it, please." Without turning around, the old man reached back and clicked the lock into place. "Now, if you would walk to the window and casually close the curtains, I'd deeply appreciate it." Newman's voice came from somewhere near the floor. Cap complied. He walked over and pulled the curtains shut, careful to do only what he was told to do. Nothing more, nothing less. "You can turn around now, doctor." Cap turned toward the voice. Newman sat on the floor in a corner of the room near the door. He smiled as he leisurely stood up and stretched. He gestured at the desk. "Please, Dr. Cap, sit down, get comfortable." He groaned slightly as he stretched. "I'm getting too old to hide in corners," he smiled. "How are you?" Cap walked over and sat down. Carefully, he scrutinized the fugitive in front of him. Newman was clean, seemed to have put on weight, was tanned, healthy-looking, and smiling. He acted as if he had just dropped by to visit, perhaps gossip a bit, and Cap hoped that this was exactly the reason he was here. The alternative was too horrible to contemplate. Newman seemed to be reading Cap's mind. "Relax," he laughed lightly. "I've got nothing against you." He paused, chuckling happily. "If I did, you'd never have seen me." "Did General Beck?" Cap gambled. Newman sat down in an overstuffed chair in front of the desk. "Did General Beck what?" "See you before he..." A pause. "Died?" Newman concentrated on adjusting himself in the chair. "Is Beck dead?" Cap nodded gravely. "Pity." Cap carefully studied the man in front of him. "The authorities believe you killed him." Newman just smiled and raised his eyebrows. "What?" "Vous." Newman seemed preoccupied with the chair. "What do you think?" he said in an offhand sort of way. Reminding himself of exactly who was sitting across from him, Cap thought that question over carefully. Newman was relaxed, unconcerned, even casual in his presentation. Yet all of that could just be still another mask hiding a sinister truth. Or a cigar could just be a cigar. "No," Cap finally said. "I do not think you killed the general." Newman half turned to him. "Really?" There's something different about Newman, but as yet Cap couldn't identify it. "I have read your note," Cap said. Newman smiled like a child on Christmas Day and his birthday combined. "Did you like it?" He turned fully to Cap, an eager expression on his face. "I mean, really like it?" Cap ignored the tone. "What does it mean?" he said in a clinical tone. "To all my friends on shore." "I worked very hard on that letter. Tried to make it clear, easy to read, yet still entertaining. How did I do?" "Do you feel adrift in the world, cut suddenly loose from the anchors you have always had?" And the spacing was important. An 1.5 inch margin all around. Newman paused. Neatness is very important in a business correspondence. Cap pulled out his pipe and began to fill it from the humidor on his desk. To all my friends on shore, he said thoughtfully. It suggests a person away on a trip, perhaps a cruise. We were talking about the letter, not the envelope, Newman said as he picked up the humidor, beginning to examine the intricate carving on it. No, Cap corrected. You were talking about the letter. He took his time lighting the pipe. To all my friends on shore. It is an interesting phrase. He looked up. Are you planning on taking a long trip over water? He smiled as he said it. Newman made a buzzing sound. 1 down, 9 to go. Cap shrugged. I like to eliminate the obvious. Good policy. Incredibly, they were both silent for 10 long minutes. You have the gift of stillness, Doctor. I admire that, Newman finally said. How are you? Newman leaned back in the chair, busy. I can imagine, Cap said seriously. You appear well. Newman stood up and slowly turned around, like a child being inspected by his parent. It's amazing what a little freedom of action can do for your mental and physical health, he said. You are eating well? On a budget, but well enough. Getting sufficient exercise? I walk a lot. And are you sleeping? 5 or 6 hours a day, sometimes more. Is that really enough? Seems to be. I wake up refreshed. You wake up refreshed, Cap paused, and you remember the pain. Newman's eyes burned with an inner fire. I missed you. Tell me about the pain. We never did finish that last session, did we? Tell me about the pain. Cap's eyes also burned. Newman sat back. What pain? Cap leaned back and puffed on his pipe. You were smarter, more aware of things than your schoolmates? Yes. You were awkward, clumsy with girls? Yes. You made elaborate plans to become a truant, to spend the days, weeks, months in a library? Yes. Tell me about the pain. The smile slowly vanished from Newman's lips, replaced by a non-look, a complete lack of any expression at all. It was unnerving, but Cap showed no sign of it. Tell me about the pain. Newman barely nodded. Do you speak Japanese? No. Know anything about 8th century Japanese society and customs? No. Imagine waking up one morning, cozy and comfy in your bed. You get up, go to the john, take a shower, brush your teeth, dress, shave, comb your hair, then step outside to begin your day. Newman paused. Got the picture? Yes. Now you step through the door and suddenly find yourself standing in 8th century Japan. You wander through the unfamiliar streets. You know you have to get somewhere, but you can't remember where or find your way. Got it? Yes. Newman's voice remained flat, his face expressionless, but anger flowed off him as if it were a physical thing, like the sweat of a boxer being thrown onto the crowd as he's nailed with a mammoth punch. Crowds quickly surround you. They're jabbering at you in this totally incomprehensible guttural language. Everyone speaking, yelling at once. You grab them by the shoulders one at a time, shake them as you yell at the top of your voice. Where am I? Where am I supposed to go? What am I supposed to do? Got it? Cap nodded. Newman leaned back, his body uncoiling, his anger waning. Now imagine, he said in a muffled voice, that you are 13 years old at the time. He paused. That, doctor, is pain. Cap had allowed his pipe to go out. He went through the process of relighting it as he tried to fathom the confusion, the pain of the teenage Newman, trapped in a world that only he could perceive, desperate to make contact with someone, anyone, that could tell him how to deal with these gifts or curses which he could only just begin to realize. "Go on," he said, after a time. "There's not much more. Go on. You're a busy man. Maybe another time." Newman smiled and stood up. But Cap noticed that he didn't turn toward the door. The pain stopped, did it not? Newman nodded. "You made it stop?" "Yes." "How?" The smile changed into a near grimace. "I think you know." "How did you stop the pain?" Newman leaned forward, his hands coming to rest on the edge of the desk. "By realizing that the problem wasn't mine." "Go on." "By realizing that it was the other's responsibility to make contact with me, not the other way round." "To all my friends on shore," Cap said in a firm voice. Newman ignored him. "By realizing that through accident of birth, evolutionary prank, or capriciousness of God, there was nothing I couldn't do. By realizing that, when it came right down to it," Newman's voice grew so soft that Cap had to strain to hear it, "my difference, my talents made me strong, stronger than anyone or anything else. To all my friends on shore." "In time, Doctor," Newman said as he walked to the door. "In time." He turned the lock, opening the door a crack to peek out. Satisfied, he opened it all the way. "Why did you come back?" Cap pressed him. Newman stopped, slowly turning back to Cap. "There was something I had to find out." "And that was?" Newman shook his head. "No matter. I know what I need to know." He started to step into the corridor. "To all my friends on shore," Cap tried one last time, but he was speaking to an empty doorway. By midnight, the fog still hadn't lifted, in fact, seemed markedly worse. The roads were closed, and travel out of the city was just not possible. In anticipation, they had agreed to meet in the bar of the Nine Muses Hotel and Spa in Munich city center. But despite that planning, one of the men was running over an hour late. "How long do we have to wait, sir?" the youngest sergeant said, as he shook his head. "We've got better things to do." Kilgore smiled. "But we're not going to get any of it done in this soup," he said casually. "We'll wait another hour." At that moment, a barmaid came up to their table, smiled alluringly at Kilgore, and handed him a note. Kilgore tipped her, watched her walk all the way back to the bar before he opened it. "Might even have to spend the night," he muttered happily, as he thumbed open the envelope. He quickly read through the short note. "We're on," he said, as he left money on the table for the drinks. "Upstairs, 1458. 5 minutes later, the two soldiers stood outside suite 1458 and knocked on the door. The tall man opened it. "Captain Kilgore?" "And you are," Kilgore said as he walked past him. "Superfluous to your business." He put a restraining hand on the sergeant's chest, "as is he." The sergeant looked at Kilgore, waiting for the silent signal that would turn him loose. But Kilgore just waited, then nodded. "It's okay," he said quietly. "Wait outside." The sergeant nodded and followed the tall man out. Kilgore walked into the sitting room of the luxury suite, admiring the crystal wine service that was laid out on the antique coffee table. The room was warm, comfortable, expensive in every sense of the word. It appeared empty. He walked over to the coffee table, picking up the bottle of wine from the table. "Nice," he said in genuine admiration as he read the label. "I never developed a taste," a voice behind Kilgore said gruffly. Kilgore didn't turn around. You must get paid better than I do, Colonel. This stuff goes for around 850 marks a bottle. Runoff walked all the way into the room. It belongs to my colleague, was all the Ramrod Strait Russian officer said. They shook hands. It's your meeting, Kilgore said while pouring himself a glass of the fine wine. Runoff spoke forcefully, but with the discomfort of a man who had dedicated his life to combating men like the young American across from him. You are having difficulty locating Brian Newman. Am I? Runoff nodded. You are. And you care about that? I do. Why? Why is Moscow worried about a man that is no longer their responsibility? Runoff walked over to Kilgore. They sat down. Responsibility is the operative word here, Captain Kilgore. There are those who believe that Mr. Newman should never have been released in the first place, not out of political retribution or international brinksmanship, but out of basic human responsibility. Kilgore put down his glass. Regardless, he was released. Now, he's our responsibility, not yours. Runoff looked at the American soldier and shook his head. How could he get the man to understand, to recognize the problem? He decided to try another tactic. Putting aside the issue of responsibility for the moment, he began again. Can you honestly say that you need no assistance whatsoever? Yes. The two men stared at each other for a long moment. How can I prove to you that I have no ulterior motives? Runoff stared into the young, hard face, a face that was in so many ways a mirror of his own distant past. My purpose is only to see that Newman is, neutralized, and to that end I am prepared to share resources with you. Share? I will put my networks at your disposal with appropriate cutouts, of course, and you will share with me what actions you have taken and what your future plans are. Kilgore laughed. He had been ordered to meet with this Russian, had seen his file, but it still seemed ridiculous. The very idea that a semi-retired Russian officer, a man with no direct intelligence ties, could lend any assistance to the Army's most elite urban search team was absurd. Don't be angry if I seem rude, Colonel Runoff, but this is just a waste of time. You don't have any resources that I don't have. He paused and chuckled. Cold War's over, Colonel. You lost, and have been downsizing ever since. Hell, that's one of the reasons you're free to be here, isn't it? They've closed down most of the old DBs, and you've been unassigned for the last 2 months. Runoff nodded. Your intelligence is most thorough, Captain, even if you have reached the wrong conclusions from it. His anger at the American's arrogance showed. Kilgore put down his glass and stood up. I've been ordered to meet with you. I've done that. If you have anything further to contribute in the future, you know how to reach me. But I see no purpose in taking anything beyond that point. He turned. Good night, sir. Runoff watched him walk to the door. You will never find him on your own, Captain. Kilgore stopped, turning back to Runoff. No? Runoff stood up slowly. No. He walked over to Kilgore. You will not. It is not a reflection on you or your men, but it is a fact. Really? Kilgore was getting annoyed. Really? The Russian seemed so sure, so arrogant, that Kilgore felt like smacking him. Discipline won out over desire. But with the help of our noble allies, with their superior techniques and routing networks, you'll ride in and save the day. Is that it? He paused, calming himself down. I always knew you people were bellicose, but you, Colonel, are something special. Brunoff ignored the man's tone. He'd probably react the same way if Kilgore had come to him in the same situation. But somehow he had to get through to Kilgore to make him see the dangers. He decided to make one last attempt to speak to the man plain soldier. Captain Kilgore, I do not claim to be better than you, and you are quite right. Our networks are decaying. I freely admit that you and your men are the best at what you do, but Newman is better. He tried desperately to find the words. My only thought is, and I say this with all due respect, sir, that combined, perhaps, we can stop this man before a major tragedy transpires. Kilgore studied him closely. There was something fearful about the man, but not fear for himself. It was more a fear of the unknown, some unknown black devastation that the man couldn't put into words. Colonel, Kilgore paused, not sure what to say. You have my number. He turned and walked uneasily toward the door. Have you ever met him, Captain? Brunoff called after him. No. Kilgore had one hand on the doorknob. I have. He walked over to the American. I spent almost 7 years staring into the monster's eyes, seeing for myself the blackness of his soul. He took a deep breath, straightened, and seemed to come back from the dark abyss he'd been descending into. And I have seen his victims. Brunoff's eyes burned with an intensity that Kilgore had seen only once before, in another man dedicated to the same cause, killed by that same demon. Make your point, Colonel, Kilgore said nervously. Brunoff hesitated, seemingly unable to put his thoughts into words. Captain, he finally said, I must advise that you are making a tragic mistake. I beg you to reconsider. Kilgore studied the man. Beneath the below-average suit and the gruff, almost militant manner, Kilgore noticed for the first time a deep exhaustion, both physical and spiritual. It lay just beneath the surface, threatening to consume the Russian. I'll give you 5 more minutes, Kilgore said. Brunoff nodded and led him back to the couch. I want to tell you about Line Sergeant Nabronsky. It was almost sunrise when the fog finally began to lift. Edel, after a long, stressful night, made his way down from the institute roof to begin the debriefing of the night shift. On his way to the conference room, Albert from Security Unit 37 caught up with him. Edel shook his head as he looked at the exhausted man. You look terrible, he said with a smile. Look who's talking, Albert shot back. You look over 100. I feel over 100. The two men walked together into the security building, off to one side of the main building. How'd it go last night? Albert shrugged. Damn fog. Edel poured them each a cup of coffee. Albert took a deep drink, then continued. Can't see shit. Every sound makes you jump. He shook his head. It happens again tonight. We got to do something. Kilgore is supposed to get us the motion detectors by 1300. We'll try and have them in by sunset. Edel noticed Cap walking toward him and excused himself. I'm sorry I couldn't get back to you earlier, Doctor. It was a long, hard night. Any casualties? Edel smiled weakly. Only a few head colds. But then our visitor didn't show last night. He seemed surprised by the expression on Cap's face. What is it, Dr. Cap? Cap's expression was distant. Excuse me. He looked at Edel's concerned expression. Is something wrong? Did something happen? Cap's mind raced. Fearing a confrontation between Newman and the security teams, which, in Cap's mind, could only end with several deaths, he had delayed calling security after Newman had left. After taking 20 minutes to fully record his impressions of the meeting with Newman, he'd tried to reach the security chief. He'd been told that Edel was out reviewing security procedures, but could be reached by radio if it was urgent. For reasons Cap didn't quite want to face up to, he'd not insisted. Then this morning, when he'd finally called back and been told that Edel could be reached at the debriefing, he'd copied those notes and headed right down, only to stop short again. Dr. Cap. The old psychiatrist turned back to Edel with a sheepish smile. I'm sorry. Is there something I can do for you? Cap took a deep breath. May I sit in on your debriefing? Edel shrugged at the continually strange requests of the head shrinkers that he worked for. Of course, doctor, take any chair. Excuse me. He walked to the front of the room, shaking his head. Taking the offered file from his secretary, he placed it on the podium, and while he waited for the men to settle down, he began to flip through it. Copies of the shift reports, requests for equipment upgrades, pleas from 9 of the 11 security teams for space heaters and hot food, and a sealed envelope labeled merely Conrad. He held the envelope up to his secretary. What's this? She shrugged. It was on your desk when I came on shift this morning. Edel nodded and set it aside for later. He looked out at the security men. If the festivities are quite over, gentlemen. They settled into their seats, but then Albert held up his hand. 7-4 isn't here yet. Where are they? Edel asked crossly. Albert laughed. They have to come all the way from the back of the woods. Maybe they got lost in the fog. Everyone laughed except Edel. We'll give them 5 minutes. He turned back to the file and began to sort the papers. Finally, noticing the envelope, he picked it up and thumbed it open just as 7-4 walked in. Edel shook his head as he took an exaggerated look at the clock. The fog, their team leader said weakly. Edel gave them a withering stare. Get some coffee and sit down. I want to get this thing started. He pulled the paper from the envelope and began to read. After a moment, his hand shaking, he folded the paper and put it back in the envelope. There will be a 10-minute delay in the debriefing, he said to a sea of shocked faces. He gestured for Cap to join him as he hurried into a side room. He was here, Edel whispered to Cap. He held out the note to Cap, who slowly read down the single sheet of paper. Dear Conrad, forgive me for not writing sooner, but you know how hectic moving can be. I am well and hope you are the same. From what little I can see for myself, you appear just fine. You probably won't believe me, but my actions were in no way directed at you. I did what I felt I had to do to protect myself and my future. I believe when you are over the shock and feelings of disloyalty, you will agree that I only did what you would have done in the same situation. I miss our talks, our discussion of scriptures, our sharing of past misadventures. I missed your wise counsel. Need it more than ever now. If you would be willing, if you can find it in your heart, to grant forgiveness one last time to this perpetual sinner, I would like very much to meet with you one last time, to explain myself, to explain Beck, to seek one last moment of gladness before I begin what will undoubtedly be a long journey of personal exile with only one possible end. If you agree, and I pray to whatever you would call the Supreme Being that you will, be at your office phone this afternoon at 5:30. I will call with the arrangements. If you cannot forgive me, know that I understand and still deeply appreciate all you tried to do to quiet the clanging in my mind, to stop the rage that threatened to consume my soul. with the trust that the wisdom of the Supreme Being, whatever that might be, will make whatever you decide the right decision. I remain your brother in arms, Brian Newman, CA. Kat looked up at Edel. What are you going to do? Edel seemed deep in thought. What he doesn't expect, I hope. Kat flicked down at the note again. The CA, do you know what it means? Edel shook his head as he hurried back into the conference room. Probably nothing, he said. That, Kat said to himself, I do not believe. He walked slowly into the room, muttering to himself as he went.